You're caught in a split-second scenario. Your life is literally on the line and you have to react. But the moment that physical chaos ends, a completely different battle begins. And this one, it's inside a courtroom. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're building a visual mind map of the exact elements of self-defense under Philippine law. We're going to take some really complex legal doctrines and turn them into an easy-to-remember memory aid. Let's get right into it.
So, think about this. If you strike back in self-defense, are you instantly seen as a victim? Or could the law actually label you a criminal? Well, it all comes down to a razor-thin legal line drawn in what courts call the spur of excitement. That's that terrifying, adrenaline-fueled moment where human survival collides head-on with the strict letter of Philippine law.
Okay, let's start building our mental checklist. Right at the center of our map is Article 11, Paragraph 1 of the Revised Penal Code. This is the holy grail for a self-defense claim because it acts as a justifying circumstance. But, what does that actually mean for you? Well, it means if you meet the exact requirements, your act is completely justified. You literally incur no criminal liability and generally no civil liability either.
But here's the catch. This protection is definitely not a free-for-all. To get that absolute justification, you absolutely have to lock in 3 indispensable elements, all at the exact same time. Let's build out the first branch of our mind map. Number 1, unlawful aggression. Number 2, reasonable necessity of the means you employed. And number 3, lack of sufficient provocation. If and only if all 3 of these coexist, you're legally in the clear.
All right, let's look closely at element number 1, unlawful aggression. Make no mistake, this is the absolute rock-solid foundation of your defense. It's defined as a physical attack that is either actively happening or about to materialize. Plain and simple, no unlawful aggression, your self-defense plea immediately falls apart. You literally cannot claim self-defense if there wasn't an actual physical danger to protect yourself from in the first place.
Now, the courts really only accept 2 valid forms of aggression. First up is actual aggression. This one's pretty obvious. It's a positive physical attack that's happening right now, like someone is actively swinging a weapon at you. Then there's imminent aggression. This means the attack is literally about to happen. But, and this is a big but, it has to be a real and immediate offensive peril. You don't have to wait to actually get hit, but the danger has to be right there in front of your face.
So, what isn't aggression? We really need to clear up some massive and honestly sometimes tragic misconceptions. An intimidating stance? Nope, not unlawful aggression. What about a really angry stare from across the room? Still no. Even severe verbal abuse or crazy threats don't count. The danger has to be offensive and physical. If you strike someone just because they cursed at you, guess what? You just became the aggressor in the eyes of the law.
Moving on to the second element, reasonable necessity. This is where things get really fascinating. Philippine doctrine doesn't demand what we call material parity. Basically, you don't need identical weapons. If an attacker comes at you with a knife, you aren't legally forced to drop your gun and go find a knife to make it a fair fight. Instead, the law uses a test of rational equivalence. It judges you based on the context and your available alternatives during that crazy spur of excitement, not on some standard of philosophical perfection.
To actually figure out if your defense was reasonably necessary, courts dig into the specific context. They look at the nature of the weapons involved. They compare the size, age, and physical skills of both people. They even look at the place and occasion. Like, were you backed into a corner in a tiny room? Was it pitch black outside? And most importantly, did you have safer alternatives? A single gunshot might actually be completely reasonable against a knife attack if the situation proves you had literally no other way to survive.
Let's anchor back to the third element on our mind map, lack of sufficient provocation. Put simply, you didn't start it. Or, hey, if you did provoke the person, that provocation wasn't enough to actually trigger their furious attack. Courts look at this subjectively based on what you did, and objectively against standard community norms. Your slate has to be clean in that specific moment. Past insults from, say, 3 weeks ago, those absolutely do not count as provocation for a sudden attack today.
So how does this all fit into the bigger picture? What if you prove there was unlawful aggression, but maybe you used slightly excessive force or you provoked them just a little bit? Well, then you fall into the zone of an incomplete defense. Under Article 69 of the Revised Penal Code, if you have unlawful aggression plus at least one other element, you don't get off completely free, but your penalty gets reduced by 2 degrees, which is still a huge deal.
Let's build out branch 3 of our map. Self-defense isn't just for protecting yourself. The law actually extends these protections outward. There's defense of relatives, which covers your spouse, parents, kids, and siblings, as long as you didn't help provoke the attack.
Then there's defensive strangers, where you step up to save someone else without being driven by revenge. And crucially, Republic Act 9262 recognizes battered woman syndrome. In these tragic cases, a homicide by a battered woman can actually be justified if specific expert evidence is established.
Which brings us to a really vital nuance. Do you have a duty to retreat? Now, unlike some U.S. states that have super strict retreat rules or specific stand-your-ground laws, Philippine law uses a case-by-case reasonableness test. There's absolutely no absolute duty to retreat. Retreating is just one factor they look at for reasonable necessity. In fact, past cases have repeatedly stated that you are definitely not expected to flee from a sudden assault when you're inside your own home.
Now brace yourself for a critical procedural reality. The second you invoke self-defense in a Philippine courtroom, there is a massive legal shift. By claiming it, you are literally telling the judge, yes, I killed or injured this person, but I was justified. Because you're admitting to the act, you take on the entire burden of proof. The prosecution doesn't have to prove you did it anymore. You now have the burden to prove exactly why you had to do it.
And listen, you can't just get on the stand and tell a really compelling story. You have to prove your defense with clear and convincing evidence. Uncorroborated, self-serving statements from the accused just won't cut it. You need concrete physical evidence. Think wound trajectories or the exact location of spent bullet shells. You need objective, impartial witnesses, and you need to establish antecedent acts, like previous threats, to paint a complete, undeniable picture of the peril you were in.
Let's quickly walk through a few historical milestones to see how the Supreme Court has actually applied these elements over the decades. Back in 1940, the Jaugery case upheld reasonable necessity when a knife was used against bare hands. Fast forward to 2003, People v. Go reaffirmed that rational equivalence of using a gun against a knife. But check out 2012, People v. Naknak. The court ruled that the exact second the victim stops attacking, the aggression ceases. If you keep shooting, you lose the defense. Finally, the 2020 Olarbe case really nailed down the strict definition of imminent aggression.
So for any litigators tuning in, or honestly anyone just wanting to lock this mind map into their memory, here's a super condensed practical checklist. Number 1, lock in unlawful aggression early using medical reports or eyewitnesses. 2, establish a precise chronology. When did the attack start and exactly when did it stop? 3, highlight environmental factors like lighting or being confined. And 4, brace for ballistics and autopsy scrutiny to solidly prove that rational equivalence we talked about earlier.
We're going to wrap up with this incredibly profound excerpt from the Supreme Court in the case of People v. Castillo. The law, in defining self-defense, does not exact from a citizen detached philosophic judgment in the heat of attack. It asks only what is reasonable in the emergency of the moment. That is such a powerful reminder. Philippine law doesn't expect you to act up a perfectly calculating machine. It just asks you to be reasonable when human survival collides with legal scrutiny. So the next time you hear about a high-profile self-defense case, ask yourself, did they perfectly meet those 3 elements, or did the spur of the moment push them just over the line? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.